Hey everyone, and welcome to an exciting and new series. This is the latest in the Make Magazine Maker Sessions. Welcome to Robot Hacks. This is a brand new and thrilling series of master sessions where we will be speaking with master makers in the fields of robotics. This is a new program sponsored by GE, where we'll be celebrating robots, small, medium, and large, and throughout the next few weeks, we'll be looking at various master makers, talking to them about different builds they've done, and looking at some of the things that are coming out in the fields of robotics, specifically open robotics. Today we've got a doubly exciting program. We've got our live hangout that's happening right here. That's also being happening live at Olin College, where we've got a live studio audience or room audience that will be watching and discussing with Brian David Johnson, Guy Cavalcanti, Sandy Winkleman, Wayne Lucy, and Dave Barrett, who will be discussing some of the greatest and newest pieces in the robotics fields. We also have, throughout the next few weeks, a second component to Robot Hacks, where Make is helping sponsor different teams who are working on robotics projects of their own and updating us through the use of our Robot Hacks community page, which you can find through the Make G Plus page at magazine.com/robothacks. So those of you guys who have signed up for those for this program, make sure to please update us and update the community with all of the different things that you've been working on and all the great pieces that we can expect to see from you. So the program today will be launching with Brian David Johnson talking about the 21st century robot. Brian David Johnson is the futurist at Intel, and he's the author of 21st Century Robot. And you can see him here with Jimmy the Robot, one of the coolest, newest creations that is coming up. Brian, why don't you go ahead and tell us everything about what you've been working on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And also want to thank the studio audience. I love the fact that we're going to call you a studio audience today. Thank you so much for coming. And like a studio audience, can I hear a studio audience? So, hello everybody, I'm Brian David Johnson, and this is Jimmy. Jimmy is the first 21st century robot. And what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing with 21st century robot, how Jimmy and the 21st century robots came about, and then we've got a great lineup of different roboticists and makers and hackers who are working with us to bring Jimmy to life. We're going to tell you that story and also tell you how you can get involved with it. And I'll be kind of emceeing and introducing everybody today as we kind of go through it. But first I want to tell you where this all started. And it all started about 10 years ago, where I started thinking, what would a 21st century robot be like? What would it be like to act and interact with this technology? It's my job as a futurist to look 10 to 15 years out and model how people will act and interact with technology. And so I started envisioning, well, what would it be like to interact with these 21st century robots? Robots that were not like the robots that you would find in industrial plants or even that you would find in colleges, but ones that were designed for people, that were designed to be social, were designed to act and interact with people. What would that be like? So before we had the technology to do this, about a decade ago, we started designing them in science fiction. We started designing them using stories, because science fiction, it gives us a landscape to talk about the future. It gives us a language. It allows us to be able to imagine what would the human impact be of living with these robots. And so I started off on a project working with roboticists from all over the world, talking about, okay, how would you build these robots? How would they interact with each other? And so we started writing science fiction stories. And as a part of that science fiction writing, we were able to start working with an illustrator by the name of Sandy Winkleman, who's here with us today. And what Sandy and I were able to do is start to think about these robots. And Jimmy was the first robot. But we thought about a lot of other robots as well, and what those robots might be like and how we could use it. And we found out that those science fiction stories became almost like the requirements document. And so for all the folks here in the room today, you all hopefully got a copy of the 21st Century Robot book. That is a book that did an early release from Make, which has 4 science fiction stories that talk about Jimmy and the 21st century robots and what it would be like to live with them, how we would act and interact with them. And then every other chapter in that book is going to be a how-to. How to build Jimmy, how to design it, how to put the sensors in. And that's really kind of what we're doing today. Part of this robot hack is actually going to be in the book. So essentially all of you and all of you who are online right now are actually a part of this book. You are now a part of the 21st Century Robot project. And then we're going to release the book in next year so then everybody can start saying, okay, here's how you could build it. And as I said, we open sourced the book. So as you go out and post to the Robot Hack website, we'll pull that in. And when you go out and these robotic teams make really cool stuff, we can then pull that back in and I'll put that into the book. We'll give everybody credit. And the whole idea is to get as many people imagining, designing, building, and sharing robots as possible. And that's really the goal of the 21st Century Robot Project. And so at the end of today's broadcast, I'll kind of give you some more information about what you can do and how you can get involved. But let's go back to the science fiction part. So as I said, Jimmy and the 21st Century Robots were born in science fiction, but not only written fiction, also in visual fiction. And also for those who are online, you can also go to the robots21.com, the 21st Century Robot project, and also I'm sure they'll put up the link. You can actually download the book for free so that you can see not only the short stories, but you can also see the illustrations. And that's why I'm really happy to have my longtime collaborator here actually on the Robot Hack with us today, which is Sandy Winkleman. So we've asked him to come and talk about what it was like to work over the last 10 years to come up with these robots and then actually begin to design them in illustration. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Sandy. Sandy comes to us from Portland, Oregon, from the West Coast. Hello, Sandy.
Hello. Yeah, like Brian said, we've been working on, well, he's been working on it for 10 years, but yeah, Brian's been working on this for 10 years, and we've been friends for quite a while, and we've both got a mutual love for robots. And while he was doing his thing, I was also just painting robots in a post-apocalyptic world. I was interested in what it would be like what would robots want to do when we're all gone. So I used to draw paintings of them like on roller coasters or walking dogs and things like that. But when I would paint these robots, I never painted anything that I thought was realistic or anything. It was just more of just for fun. They were kind of more stick figures or whatever. But then Brian created the science fiction and wanted an illustration design for Jimmy. So it was up to me to try to figure something out. And based on his writings, I knew he had to be short. I knew he had to have big hips. And he had to be non-threatening. He had to walk like a duck. And as a kid, I really loved the movie E.T., the extraterrestrial. I really loved that movie. I used to be able to draw E.T., and I remember watching the documentary as a kid on how they designed E.T. and how all the different iterations they went through to create E.T. Because in a lot of ways, E.T. has to have the same characteristics of Jimmy. I mean, he had to be non-threatening, he had to be friendly to kids, he had to be short, and still be able to function in a world that is ours. So I kind of piggybacked off the designs of E.T. and all the research they'd done, and I knew he had to have big eyes and kind of a large head and short, just like E.T. So I mean, Jimmy's body is based off of the extraterrestrial E.T., but his head had to go somewhere else. I mean, it's a robot. It's not a living, breathing creature. So his head is actually based off of the 2002 IMAX. I don't know if you remember those, but the one that had the round base at the bottom, and then it had an arm and then a flat screen. It came right after all those candy color IMAX. So this was 2002. So his head and his kind of the color and look, that ice white, is a total nod to the whole iPod designers over at Apple and everybody that was working there. And I still think I love the way it looks. It's just a clean sort of robotic look. And just sort of more of a unique look that needed to happen. I didn't want Jimmy to look like any other robot that was out there, that consumer-like robot. I wanted it to be unique and friendly. that's the other thing about the eyes. I mean, to make it friendly, I realized his eyes had to be big and expressive, and that's the other real challenge with the robot is giving a robot some type of expression or emotion. Like how can you tell if a robot's happy or sad? And I realized it had to be in his eyes. It had to be. That's why his eyes are so big, and also separating his eyes apart and having them kind of wide set for whatever reason makes them also seem very non-threatening. And the other thing that I really kind of accidentally happened but really like about his head is that when you look down on him, because he's shorter than you and the way his head is so rounded, it constantly looks like he's smiling because he's got no mouth, but that arc of the bottom of the head creates sort of a round smiling feel to it, and he's just so cuddly. Can't help it. And probably the hardest part about creating Jimmy was knowing that he was actually going to get built. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I know enough to get in trouble, but I don't know how to make an actual robot that can walk and talk and articulate the way it needed to be. So I spent a lot of time just kind of really trying to think about it, and I felt like the hips were probably the most difficult part. And it's really blowing me away to see what the guys over at Olin College have been doing to really make him come alive. I mean, watching all these joints come together, and something that I thought was going to have to be drastically changed actually is looking more and more like what I originally wanted it to, what I envisioned, and it's just amazing. I mean, this whole journey is amazing to me to see from my multiple drawing and illustrations to seeing where it's going now. I'm just blown away. I'm super excited to see the evolution of Jimmy and see where it takes it and all the other robots that come out of this whole experience. I'm thankful to everybody at Olin College and everybody that's involved in this whole thing because it's just amazing.
What was the source of the name Jimmy?
So the source of the name Jimmy, so the idea behind the 21st Century Robot Project is that every robot has a name, right? That every robot needs to be an individual because it's built by an individual. And so originally when we were brainstorming the name, we wanted a name that would be as non-threatening as possible and a name that would kind of fit this little guy. And so when you heard it and somebody said, hey, I want to introduce you to my robot, Jimmy, I think we kind of tried to pick the most improbable name as possible. And so we thought Jimmy would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I should mention today so that as you're going through that you can follow Jimmy on Twitter. Jimmy actually has a Twitter address. His Twitter address is 21C Robot, 21C Robot. And I just found out when we launched the 21st Century Robot Project, my mother now follows Jimmy on Twitter, which is kind of weird when your mother follows your robot on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I'm Intel Futurist at Intel Futurist, and also the folks at Make are Make. So again, we want to thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much. I really would recommend everybody go have a look at the book. Please download and have a look at the work that Sandy's done because Jimmy really is just the first one. And Sandy has spent a lot of time designing these robots to look like 21st century robots, to not look like the robots of the 20th century and beyond. And they're more than just bipedal. There's some really crazy robots, and there's even some that you'll meet Dave Barrett later, but Dave tells me that almost might be physically impossible to actually build. So Sandy and I are now challenging the engineering world with the designs of these robots. So, well, it's until you guys fix it. Okay, so speaking of bringing Jimmy into the real world, so as I said, so Sandy and I worked for quite some time kind of going through and imagining what these robots could look like and imagining how you could live with somebody like Jimmy. But then it was time to take it to the next step. We were getting ready for the World Maker Faire where we were going to launch the 21st Century Robot Project, and we're actually going to start talking to people about it, start talking about these robot hacks and getting everybody involved. And so we needed somebody who could take the illustrations and the fiction of Jimmy and literally bring him into the real world. And we're really, really, really fortunate today to actually have here in person Wayne Losey to tell us about what that process was like, how you could take something that was literally born of people's imagination and actually make it so that I could stand here in front of you today. This was actually what Wayne created that's printed on a hobby 3D printer. and Wayne actually brought him into real life. So please give a round of applause to Wayne Losey, and he's going to tell us about that.
So this guy was a challenge. We had, basically I came onto the project about 2.5 months maybe into before Maker Faire. At this point, I had had no direct experience of printing from a hobby printer. I had sent them to people to be printed, prints to be done before. And I had had a ton of experience using service bureaus like Shapeways and prototyping services. You know, I've been using prototyping as a tool for the past 20 years in the toy industry. So in some ways, I leveraged all that past experience to be able to put Jimmy out in that, I think it ended up being about 1.5 months from the time that I started the files. But Jimmy was built in Rhino. Really great solid modeling package. When I was building him, part of the challenge is you can see he's pretty big. And in fact, I think we wanted him to be like 3 feet tall when we first had the discussion. The challenge is putting him into small enough pieces that we could actually build him on a hobby scale printer. His head, as you can see here, is quite large, and it's built in 2 pieces that needed to be hollowed out. So just laying up the pieces and building the pieces so that they can fit on some of the build, some of the hobby scale build platforms was a challenge in itself. PLA, as far as in my experience, I came from toys, so everything is built from engineering grade plastics, nylons, ABS, styrenes, polycarbonate. So trying to ensure that we had a robust design that was not going to fall off of a table and shatter into a billion pieces for Maker Faire was really important. This had to be something that I would carry around, as he did to all the morning shows and all the press junket that he did right before and during Maker Faire. So in a lot of ways, I had to overbuild the model in the sense of I would never make the walls this thick. So a lot of these prints actually took like 24 hours to print. The head is in 2 halves. Each one of those took 21 hours a piece. The chest and hips, the chest halves and hips, both took, all 3 took 19 hours a piece. And then there's just the whole hobby scale experience of having to tune your machine, deal with sort of buggy software, firmware changes, all of the things that go with the state of the art of 3D printing right now. But I learned a lot in that 1.5 months of building this thing, and fortunately I had all those problems very early on and was able to front load everything, and that's what really allowed me to get this thing done just in time. What was it, 3 days beforehand? We met here at Olin, and that was the first time I put Jimmy together, was here. So, yeah, I guess I'm like his midwife to some extent, as far as helping to bring him into this reality. I know that we're going to have all of the models available if they're not available already. We're working at putting them in multiple formats so that they are both printable and modifiable. Obviously the idea is to provide as much of this information as possible so that everybody, all of you, have the ability to print files, hack the files, break the files. The files have already been rebuilt by several people several times, so you're not just going to have the files that I built originally. You're going to have files that are available in multiple solid modelers and in multiple formats. So, yeah, that's it. Anything else we need to cover? Thank you guys so much for having me on. And if you have questions about Jimmy, you can reach me on Twitter at KidMeccano. Thank you so much.
Hey, Wayne.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to know, Wayne, how many iterations do you have? And also, that's a question for Sandy as well. How many iterations of Jimmy have you guys gone through over the course of designing and optimizing?
As far as full iterations, I would say, well, I did a small scale Modibot version that's posable and printable in SLS. I've done this large version, but he really is. Oh, here he is. So this was all done to be printed in Polyamide. But right now, there really are only these two versions. As far as the iterations, I guess we'll have another iteration soon for SolidWorks or whatever. But the way I tended to work was I would design a part and then I would debug that part. So to some degree, I didn't design it all at one time. I designed, I had to redesign the hips 3 or 4 times. The ankles and knees and how the chest fit together. How the neck actually moves inside the torso. All of those were done more as they were designed as assemblies and then put together. So each part has several iterations, and I guess if you counted all that, he's probably like, Jimmy 1.05 or something like that. So.
Gotcha.
How about you? Hey, Sandy, how many iterations would you say that you went through with Jimmy?
I would probably say there was 4 or 5 different drawings that I was working on, and then eventually, once it got close, it happened really quickly. It seemed really obvious that it was right, so I didn't have to stop. But I was more worried about, like I said before, just kind of articulation and joints and how that would work. There was probably more iterations in that than anything else because I actually had to think about it, and I'm not used to doing that when drawing robots or what I was used to drawing robots, just making it more simple and fun. And I knew this one had to be built. So I'd say there was quite a few, just more in the joints and the articulation of it all than anything else.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question.
And then, Brian, we've got questions that are coming in from some of the viewers as well. I don't know if you want to jump into those now or if we should handle those at the end of everything.
Why don't we do maybe 1 or 2 now, and then we can make sure we stay on time. Let's just do 1 now.
Okay, so the top one right now is Aaron Maurer wants to know where he can get Jimmy for the classroom for his students to tinker with. So is there a spot where that might be posted at some point? I know Wayne was mentioning it should be available eventually.
It will be available eventually. I would say not yet. That's really one of our goals, and the goal of everybody who's been involved in this project, the people who you've met and the people who you will meet, is to have versions of this so that all the way down to grade school level, when it comes to just the small little version that Wayne showed, that we can get lots of kids and lots of students designing robots in their imagination first. That's actually part of our manifesto, which I'll talk about at the end. And then we'll be developing and sending out, first off, the 3D designs, and then the designs, the physical designs, the mechanical designs that come up later. So the place that you would go to would be both the Robot Hacks website and the 21C Robot site. Both of those is where we're going to print those, where we'll put those so that you can print them. And we're really going to encourage as many students to become a part of it. Probably as we get into 2014 is probably when we'll start releasing those.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So why don't we keep moving, and we'll take a couple questions in between each one, but I want to make sure that all of the different collaborators get a chance to talk as well. But I do need to say one thing about working with Wayne, and when we went to the World Maker Faire in New York City, right, when it was huge Maker Faire, and we showed up and did the introduction, the actual unveiling of Jimmy, and I was on stage, and I told people I wanted to introduce them to somebody, and I went behind stage, and I came back with Jimmy, and the entire room gasped. You have a whole room of engineers and makers and hackers who actually gasped when I sent Jimmy down and they saw him for the first time, when I told them that he had been designed in fiction and then printed out on a hobby, a consumer-grade printer. And a lot of them would come up to me afterwards, and actually Wayne was coming down the next day, and they wanted to know, how did you possibly get that done? That's impossible. You could not have pulled that off on a hobby printer. And so very quickly, Wayne became like this absolute sort of god of 3D printing because people didn't believe that he could actually get it done. And I maintain it's the fact because Wayne is actually incredibly talented in design, in doing work like this, but he didn't know that he shouldn't be able to do this. Like, he didn't know that you weren't supposed to be able to do this on a hobby printer, but he actually got it done. So the next step in the 21st century robot process is coming here to Olin College. And we're now collaborating with the folks here at Olin. We have teams of students and teams of makers actually starting about building the insides of Jimmy, actually getting him moving and building the guts of Jimmy. And so we're very lucky to have Guy Cavalcante on the broadcast today. And he's going to talk a little bit about kind of what he's going through and what it's taking to actually build the insides of Jimmy. So everybody please welcome Guy.
Hi, everybody. It's funny because Brian and I were on a broadcast before. It was just the Big Brain Theory on Discovery Channel where we made pancake robots together. So it's a little bit different. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the mechanical design process of Jimmy. And let me share this presentation with you guys. Let's see. So let's talk about how robots are designed. Is that visible to everybody?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So before we talk really about robots, let's talk about humans, right? Because the whole idea is that Jimmy is humanoid, right? Not human, but humanoid. And it turns out that human beings are actually really good at a lot of stuff that robots aren't, right? So here are a couple of examples. You know, the top right, this woman is around 75 years old, right? And she's balancing, right? We have a cyclist here who's hitting something like 30 or 40 miles an hour without working too hard. And we have a deadlift of 1,100 pounds plus, right? So when you actually look at the capabilities of human beings, it's pretty impressive, right? Like, we can do a lot with our bodies when we really try. So we've jumped 8 feet in the air. We've hit 25 miles an hour on foot. We've done an 1,180-pound deadlift, right? We've ridden bicycles at 83 miles an hour, right? And we can throw fastballs over 100 miles an hour. And this is basically ridiculous, right? Like, when you think about how you can optimize the human form, given the fact that it is so general, right? There's a lot we can do. So when it comes time to building humanoid robots, all of a sudden we're left with this idea of like, well, all of our tech really isn't that great yet. We don't have the equivalent of muscles. So if we want to be able to walk and we want to be able to move around, how do we build this? So if you're life size, you have to spend a lot of time working on actuation. You have to spend a lot of time designing custom linear actuators, rotary actuators. You know, Asimov was one of the first humanoids to really walk, and then you started having robots like Robonaut on the left, Petman on the right, that started kind of evolving the space. And then we really started getting interested in building small robots. But here's the problem. When you build so small, you start running into this deal where the laws of electromagnetism don't really want you to go smaller than a certain size. Because at some point you lose the ability to have motors that generate enough power to move joints for their volume. And that's really not something we've solved as a species yet, and physics may not allow us to solve it in this particular case. But this is kind of a good example of how small conventional robots get. The robot on the left there is a Bioloid kit from a company called Robotis. The robot on the right is NAO, and the thing that they share is that their size is driven by the motors available to us today. And these guys are somewhere between 16 inches and 18 inches tall. So Jimmy is actually in between the big robots, right, and the really small robots. And Jimmy's pretty artistic compared to especially these small robots. These small robots don't really have much sculpting. They're just the size of their motors. So when we go to design, now we have to say, well, the links are just a little bit bigger than the motors, and now we have to figure out how to flesh out this design process. So this is a little quick study on what it's usually like. Usually you decide on the size of your robot. You estimate as best you can what all of the little bits and pieces of your robot weigh. You select the desired motions, right? Are we going to do jumping jacks? Are we going to walk? Are we going to run? Are we going to do push-ups, right? Given those motions and given those weights and given the link sizes, you characterize how fast each link needs to move and how much torque it needs, and then you kind of pick the motors that fit that, right? Except usually what happens is you pick motors that fit your ideal, and then you realize all of your estimates were wrong. And so you actually have to start back into this cycle where you're like, all right, well, let me estimate the link weight again, and then go through the motions again, and then characterize the speeds and torques, and then does my motor still work? And usually the answer is no. So then you kind of keep going, right? And you change your design process to, okay, well, can my motion scale back a little bit, right? Can I not do jumping jacks, but instead just kind of wave my arms in the air and step to the side? A little bit different, right? And then eventually you may decide, well, I can't really build a robot this size. Let me scale up or scale down. So that's the messy process that we're in right now. It's like, we have to make this real using technology available today. So what is the solution to this many-faceted problem that will allow us to get here? So right now, you know, one of the things we're blessed with is that we have a lot of the specs already. We have how long the limbs are. We have the rough shape of them. And we can skip this step of like, well, how big does a thing need to be exactly humanoid shaped? But one thing we do need to understand is, given the shape that we have, how much does it weigh, so we can estimate how much torque, how much speed, how big of a motor we need everywhere. Then we have to decide what joints do we actually want, right? So it's not just about, you know, how much force everything takes. It's actually about what do you want to actuate, right? Is it okay if Jimmy can't bend at the elbow, right, or can't close his hand, right? That's an open question. There probably need to be a whole range of Jimmys, right? So maybe there's one that just kind of toddles around, and maybe there's one that's fully articulated and can grab whatever's around it and hold it up to eye level. But choosing how many motors, how many joints is actually a pretty critical part of figuring out how much it's going to cost, how big it needs to be, what's even achievable. So once we figure out how many motors, we decide, okay, how much do those motors have to move? And this is actually pretty critical because it's not just about getting a motor that moves that much. It's about designing a mechanical structure for the robot that allows that much range of motion, which gets pretty hideously hard pretty fast. So one thing we did very early on is we said we're gonna not open this design space up to every possible solution, right? Because if we did that, we'd be here for years before we had a functional robot. So we decided early on, you know what, we're going to pick these motors that are used for humanoid robotics all the time, these Dynamixel motors from Robotis. The nice thing about them is that they have an integrated gear train, they have a motor controller built into them, they have a really nice motor, and they have a lot of standard output sizes that click together. One thing that's really cool is that they actually daisy chain. And for everybody at home who's about to start building this kind of robot, once you realize that, oh, hey, I have 6 motors in the leg, and oh, now I need 6 motors worth of wires to go through the hip, you start realizing, oh, wait, this is really hard. It turns out 75 to 80% of industrial robot failures are not actually mechanical in nature. They're in wires ripping out of their sockets. It's silly, it's stupid, but you have a lot of people who say, I've designed this beautiful mechanical thing, and oh yeah, now I have to slap some wires on the side and hope that it still works. So these motors kind of make sure that you don't have to go down that really messy path of doing all that wiring and figuring it out. So that was kind of a blessing for us as well. But now, given these motors, how do we make it work, right? So, so we had, near the start of the whole process, we had the 3D printed Jimmy show up, right? And everybody got to play with all the parts, and everybody started freaking out a little bit. Problem was, all of these parts, they're beautiful, right? But they're really small compared to the actual motors that we're capable of using. So it becomes, this problem quickly becomes one of not only what speed, what force, what torque do we need, but how do we fit these physical motors that have a certain envelope into this build volume? And this isn't a problem just for Jimmy. This is a problem for every humanoid robot known to man, because it's actually really hard to get motors that are high enough power and small enough to fit inside these joints while still doing appreciably cool things. So what the team, so we're in this mechanical design class at Olin College, and these guys are having an amazing time working through all of the problems that arise in trying to package these motors into these very small volumes. So what they've been going through over the past month or two is they've been explicitly trying to design joints with gear reductions, with belt reductions, with linkages, with cams, to see what works, right? Like, how do you make a wrist that moves the way it should in the volume that it has, using parts that are available to engineers, parts that you can 3D print, what have you. So this is an example of Jimmy's wrist that one team presented recently. It's a very, very small belt drive. And you can see on the right, the wrist is rather tiny, right? Like, this is one of the smallest Dynamixel motors available. And it's taking up the entire volume, right? So kind of challenging. We keep moving through the design space, and what we'll basically find is, oh, well, maybe this upper arm can't be as narrow as it is right now if Jimmy's ever going to be able to hold a thing in his hand, right? So maybe we need to make it just like a tiny bit fatter, right? So Jimmy puts on like a tiny little bit of weight so that a motor can actually go into the upper arm. We have a whole bunch of teams working in tandem, right? And they're exploring this design space together. They're presenting in class on what they've found. So, on the right you have a hand that was built with linkages. On the left you have a hand that's working with a belt drive that's really more of just a band, right? Like, how do you make a wrist that closes around objects and doesn't get overdriven if you accidentally clutch something too tightly, right? Can you build in a clutch of some kind? And so this is the kind of thing that everybody's working on. And we have multiple parallel teams trying to attack the problem from different angles to see what the best solution might be in the end for all of these joints. So this is another example, right? So these are 3 different versions of Jimmy's knee. The one on the left is a spur gear reduction. The knee, by the way, is one of the hardest joints to design. Human beings can generate torques of upwards of 150 to 200 foot-pounds of torque on their knees in a deep squat. That is basically equivalent to any sedan sold right now. Like, the torque at the output of the transmission of most family-sized sedans is on the order of 150 to 200 foot-pounds of torque. So the knee is actually really difficult to design, and you see lots of gear reductions in all of these knee designs. So the spur gears on the left are 1 to 3, 1 to 4 reduction. On the in the middle, you can see a worm gear reduction from the Dynamixel motor. That's something more akin to like a 15 to 20 to 1. And then on the right, you can actually see some teams experimenting with the belt drive. And so each of these has kind of changed volume slightly in some ways. I think the one in the middle hasn't changed volume much at all, but it's hard. Getting motors to work inside this volume is really difficult. And that's something that the teams are exploring, trying to figure out what the right transmission style is, what the right reduction is, so that once it's done, we can release all this data and say, look, this is what we actually found to work. So, time for fun aside. Not just building Jimmy nowadays. Jimmy is actually the smallest thing I've built in a very long time, or worked on in a very long time. My current project is this. I don't know if you guys know of Project Hexapod, Stompy, but basically, what I'm working on now, and what you can see behind me, let's see, is it coming back up yet? Yeah. So, those are the robots I work on. This is a giant 100 horsepower power plant with a 600-pound engine in it. Over there are bits of legs, right? This is all open source. So both Jimmy and this giant robot will actually be open source, probably around the same time. But like that's fun, right? Like, how do you do this robotics research? How do you figure out how to fit motors into these kinds of robots, right? How do you make this actuation work so that you can make really, really cool stuff? And how we teach all of you guys how to do this. That's really what all of these projects are about, right? Is exposing people to robots, teaching them what the challenges are, teaching you how to overcome those challenges, and really starting to get into this process. So that's the inside of Jimmy. It's still being fleshed out. It's still kind of, you know, messy, but working on it. I'm getting there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabe. Let's give some applause to Gabe. Yeah, it was very funny when I first met Guy for the second time. They said, "Oh, you've got to meet Guy. He's going to be building the insides of Jimmy." And I said, "Oh, that's great." And we were in the lab here at Olin, and I walk up and I was like, "Wait a minute, I know that guy. I met that guy on TV." And I walked up to him and we both sort of recognized that we had met each other and there were cameras around us and we had actually met each other on a reality TV show. This does not happen too much. I was like, "I know you." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "From TV." So thanks, Gabe. It's great having you today. So the final speaker today is Dave Barrett. And I got to Dave by Rodney Brooks. So for the folks who know robots and know sort of the history of robots, Rod is this sort of incredible figure that moved robotics forward at the end of the 20th century. It really took it from sort of big AI and Asimov and some of those big robots that Guy was showing you into things like Roomba. That's what he's best known for. I was on a panel where Rod was talking about Baxter, his new manufacturing robot, and I was talking about Jimmy, which in and of itself I think was the fulfillment of a dream, to actually have one of these amazing thinkers, and he's still an amazing thinker. And we were talking about it, he kind of became a fan of Jimmy and became a fan of it, and I had told him we had this crazy idea that we wanted to open source Jimmy, and we wanted to get as many people building it as possible. And he says, "You know, I have a guy who you need to talk to, because you've got to see this program up here at Olin College." And he hooked me up with Dave, and Dave and I talked, and I told Dave all about the 21st Century Robot Project and all about these highfalutin ideas we had about it being open source, and we're going to give away all of the AI and give away all the designs and give away everything, and we wanted to really partner with somebody. And there's this silence on the line. And I don't know if you have ever given a pitch or given something, you realize that you have failed. That he may have even hung up because he thought I was crazy. I have no idea. And then I hear this little laugh and this little chuckle. And he goes, "Brian, I got to tell you what I was doing." I was like, "What?" And he goes, "I just came from lunch where I was talking with my colleague, and we were looking for this a project that we could start building around robots that are biped robots." He said, "So can you give me a couple days?" I was like, "Okay." We kind of hung up, and I didn't hear from Dave for like a while. And then he calls me back and he goes, "Yeah, I think we can build Jimmy. And I think we'll have him done by like November or December." And it was like a dream come true. It was absolutely a dream come true. And it was when we came here and we got to visit the work that's being done at Olin and got to meet Guy again, actually got to see the work here. It's amazing. The stuff that's going on and the stuff that Dave and the team are building are absolutely incredible. So I wanted to bring Dave up just to talk about the process, talk about how we're kind of getting Jimmy to the point then where we can sort of release it to everybody, but mainly getting Jimmy to the point where he can walk and balance. And I know Dave's dream is to have him balance on one foot, but that'll be coming soon. But please welcome Dave Barrett.
I used to have a small child. I think you have to hold Jimmy like this. So his head right off.
Oh!
Every mother in the world is now horrified.
Don't let Dave hold your baby.
I'm sorry, Brian. Hi, I'm Dave. I have one of the best jobs on the planet Earth. I get to teach engineering here at Olin College. I'd like to welcome you all to the campus and welcome you to the Jimmy program. So, Olin is a very unique college. We're probably the first maker college on the planet Earth. Our curriculum is centered around a design. Our curriculum is centered around a design-build philosophy where basically we figured out early on the students learn much better by building than by listening to some old guy like me talk for 2 hours. So our curriculum has this very constant thread of design, make, test, break, design, make, test, break over and over again. This semester, I'm teaching mechanical design. I have 40 of the best young engineers on the planet Earth in the class. And I'm sitting around at the end of the summer thinking about what should we build? And I have a couple of things under development. We're looking at big agricultural robots. We're looking at undersea robots. And Brian calls me up out of the blue and he says, I want to build a humanoid robot. My first thought, he's freaking crazy. Does he have any idea how hard this actually is? So we talked for a while, and he sent me his book, and I read it. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? The world isn't changed by people that say it's impossible, it's hard, it can't be done. Any research lab on the planet Earth would have sent him away scarring. Most companies would have sent him away scarring. But I thought, the world is changed by young people that believe they can build anything. And at Olin, that's kind of our tradition. We believe that we can make anything come true. Our goal is actually to give kids the best education on the planet Earth and send them out to make it a better place. So our mission is to take on nearly impossible challenges and show that we can do them. So I thought about it a little bit and I said, well, why not? The entire aircraft industry was created by two young guys named Wilbur and Orville Wright. They were bicycle mechanics and they built the industry in their garage. It wasn't created by a giant research lab. It wasn't created by a huge multinational corporation. It was created by a couple of young people that didn't know they couldn't do it. Olin's full of those young people. My class has the future Orville Wrights in it, creating stuff. And part of my job is to get projects that are interestingly enough and complex enough to let them kind of try out their entire engineering wings and build phenomenal stuff. So Jimmy's actually a perfect match for Olin. It's damn near impossible. It's incredibly challenging. It's very hard. Getting it to do the kind of things we want to do at the price point that it should be done at so people can afford it is pushing the boundaries of what's physically possible. That's what makes it such an amazing program to actually work on. So we're all looking forward to getting Jimmy to walk before the end of the semester. Not making any hard promises yet because this may violate physics.
You can do it!
We'll go right up to the boundary, but we can't step over there. And so the final Jimmy may need some subtle modifications here and there, but Wayne and crew did a spectacular job building us a robot to actually stuff. There's some parts that are a little skinny in places, and there's some parts that we're going to have some unsightly bulbs sticking out. But you can sort of think of Jimmy's like this now. He's going to go to the gym and become a weightlifter. He's going to get biceps and triceps and a kid kind of cut up butt. And we have all that extra space in there. We can pack these motors in and get the thing to actually walk. Also, having worked with him for about 2 months, an incredibly expressive character. He's going to be a beautiful dancer and a beautiful mime, and he has a very expressive body and can convey both character and performance and personality just by tipping his head a little bit in one direction or another. And so we're all eagerly looking forward to inviting a larger community of builders and makers to begin to step into Jimmy, alter the design a little bit, work on the sounds he can make, work on the behavioral movements he can make to express character and interest, and get a whole family of Jimmys out there and running. My class will produce somewhere between 7 and 14 different designs, and we're going to open source all these so people can step in and add to it. And we're very eager to find out what the rest of the planet Earth does with the design and pass it on too. And with that, I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, and that's really kind of brings us to the end. We'll take questions, and we saved some time for questions. But I wanted to kind of finish up to talk about the DNA and the core of the 21st Century Robot project. As Dave said, it's open source, and it's actually about getting together with the community to actually build these robots. And as we were getting ready to kick off the project, Dale Doherty, the CEO of Make, came to me and said, you know, what differentiates a 21st century robot from a 20th century robot? You know, what is it? How is it different? Because we kept saying, your robot's so 20th century. It's so last century. You need to come up with a 21st century robot. And he said, well, what defines a 21st century robot? And so we came up with this manifesto that we're going to bring up here on the screen in a second. And the idea is that ultimately that a 21st century robot is imagined first. That it starts in the imagination. With us, it started with science fiction stories and Sandy's drawings, but everybody can design a robot because everybody can imagine a robot. And then the second part is that it's easy to build. That we've reached a point with our technology, with 3D printing technology, with shrinking computational power, with the Make movement, and with open source design, that everybody should be able to build a robot, and we should be able to make them easy to build. And that's one of the things that everybody who's involved in the process really believes in, is that we're doing this so we can put it into the hands of everybody. Number three is that it's completely open source. So the 21st Century Robot Project, the 3D design files are open source. That meaning you can have your robot look like what you want your robot to look like. That's what I tell everybody. Your robot doesn't have to look like Jimmy, although he is cute as a bug's ear, but every robot should be individual. you should be able to design what you want your robot to look like. And that's why we're giving away the design files, as Wayne mentioned. We're going to put them out there, and then as we start to do other design files of the other 21st century robots, we'll put them out there. But then also, we're going to open source the mechanics. So the great work that's going on here, in college with Dave and Guy, is once we get those designs out, we're going to release those on the web. And then finally, we have the AI, and the AI is being built at USC, at the robotics lab at USC. And unfortunately, they couldn't be with us today on this hack, but we're going to have them back at another hack because the work that they're doing is absolutely amazing. They're actually creating a real AI that they're going to open source that's app-based, meaning you just can write little apps for your robot and download them. So think about your robot as kind of, from a software standpoint, being like a smartphone, that you can personalize it as much as you could personalize a smartphone. And so that's the idea behind here, is that it's completely open source. And then next is that these robots are social. That we've got lots and lots of people who are designing robots to do amazing things, to do surgery on people, to have people who are using them for agriculture. Our idea with the 21st century robot is that it's there to be social. It's there to act and interact with you. It's there to act and interact with other robots and other robots and other devices. And then finally, the final bits is that it's intentionally iterative. The idea is that everybody should be able to build not just one robot, but a lot of robots. I think that's what I wrote in the book. Why would you only build one robot when you could build many robots? And that they're filled with our humanity and dreams, that human beings build these robots. We imbue them with our dreams and our sense of humanity. And then finally, that they're thinking for her, him, and itself, is that it's got real AI, that it's not a puppet, that it's really there to interact with you. And that's why also our motto is that every robot has a name, because every robot is built by somebody, and every robot should be an individual and should be there to interact and act and interact with you. And ultimately, it's my dream that just as today, we have an entire generation of kids who have never known a time without the internet. That have never known a time when you can't sit down at a computer and have any piece of information at your fingertips. And so it's our dream for the 21st Century Robot Project to have an entire generation who have never known a time when you couldn't imagine, design, build, and share your own robot. That robots are something that we live with and that we design ourselves. And that's really the goal. So if you want to be a part of it, you can go to the Robot Hacks website. We're putting together some teams. We're going to be releasing more design files. We're going to be releasing the work that's been done here. We'll be talking more in some subsequent Robot Hacks about the AI. And the whole idea is that we don't know what a 21st century robot is. Ultimately, we don't know. But together, we can all find out. Together, you all can tell us what you think your 21st century robot could be and should be. And then you can send it to us. And we'll put it online, and we'll also put it into the book and give people credit. Because I think that's the future that we're moving towards. That's the future that we want to see, is a world filled with robots. So please go join, and I'd love to hear what you come up with. And I think we've got a little bit of time left. I think we can take some questions.
Great, thank you, Brian. This is such a fantastic program. It's a beautiful platform. It's an ambitious platform, and I'm thrilled that you guys were all able to share the overview with us today. It's a fantastic design. So we've got a few people that have chimed in online here with some questions. First one is wondering how much material was required to print Jimmy. They want to get an estimate of what the cost would be for them to print out their own.
I'll turn that over to Wayne.
Perfect.
I would say he was about, well, the whole process probably took about 3.5 spools of filament in
like
total.
$40 each, 40, 50 bucks each?
Yeah, 35 to 40 bucks a piece. This build right here took about 1.5 spools of PLA.
It's about
Just what you see here.
50, 60 bucks?
Yeah.
How much would it cost to, say, print like at a place like, oh, I don't know, Shapeways?
It would be more than that.
And that's also part of this project is to push the industry, right? To push the robotics industry, the 3D industry forward, to actually figure out how we can get the cost down, because ultimately we want the entire build of materials to be under $1,000, hopefully under $500. And that's one of the things also that we're working with lots of really interesting companies who've come on and been a part of the project. So there's the company that I work for, certainly Intel. There's GE, who's sponsoring the robot hacks. There's Autodesk, who's working on the 3D modeling software. There's lots of companies that are really interested in this as well. So we're also using this as a platform not only to build awesome robots, but also we're using it as a way to go back to different industries to see if we can, through sort of using scale, to actually get the cost down as much as possible. So as we get out there and start releasing these, we're also going to start challenging people to find what's the most inexpensive way to print it. Can you print it locally? Can you send it away to possibly a bot farm to print it? We're trying to find different ways to, again, to give you the tools that you need to build these robots. Next question.
Okay, so another question, this one's from Ross Bochnek. He's wondering, how important is Jimmy's neck articulation to his balance, and is his head actively used to help him balance?
Dave says yes. So that's what the team is doing right now. If you can pan over to this, this of course is the render that's happening right now. Is that to get somebody to walk, you're having to shift the balance, and there's lots of ways that you can shift the balance. And one of the things that Dave and Guy and the team are working on is how to use the head, the arms to actually shift and give counterbalance when he lifts his foot. So they're actually working that out right now, actually working on the calculations to not only give Jimmy the ability to have the articulation, but then also they have the articulation not only so he can walk, but the articulation so he can balance while he's walking. So the head is very important. And actually, if you go and you even read the very, very early short stories about Jimmy, it actually talks about how he walks. And he actually, as Sandy said, he kind of walks like a duck, and he kind of wobbles. And so actually, when we were laughing that the science fiction stories are really the system diagram, the early requirements documents, if you will, from an engineering standpoint, that really what Dave and Guy are doing is actually they're just building to the requirements documents, because he's always had this funny little waddle of a walk where he uses his head for balance.
Brian, this is Stuart. What kind of work are you guys anticipating doing on speech and the other dimensions of humanoid behavior?
Well, speech is something that we're actually right in the middle of discussing, and the folks from USC, Maya and Ross from USC, will be able to really get into that, because they are very much into effective computing and emotional computing and being able to act and interact. I mean, ultimately, as we say in the manifesto, Jimmy is designed to be social. And those parts, how he gestures, what he sounds like, what his lighting scheme might look like, how he expresses himself, we think is really, really important. But what we're trying to do is create a platform of sounds and lights and expression in multiple voices, again, because every robot has a name, so every robot's an individual, so every robot should have his, her, or its own voice. We're marching to that level of requirements. So what we're really looking to do in 2014, when we really launch the more advanced version of this, is actually to go out and ask everybody and giving them the platform and the tools that they need to start playing with the voice, playing with the gestures, playing with the different sounds that the robot might make. So we're really trying to create a platform to get other people to tell us what they think it should be.
Great.
So this question might be a little bit challenging, but one of the ones that's come in here is asking what kind of personalization do you envision for Jimmy?
He should be completely personalized. I mean, it depends upon the skill level of the builder and the maker. I mean, in the beginning, you could just take the exoskeleton. So we've got the internal design that's coming from the folks here at Olin College. You'll have the brain that's coming from the folks at USC. You've got the physical design that came from Sandy and Wayne. If you have a low level, you could possibly just give Jimmy horns, right? You could change the exoskeleton, if you will. There'll be design parameters on the inside that you can't change if you just want to change the exoskeleton. And then you can go all the way down. So just all the way to the level that Guy was getting to, that if you're good enough, you can change the number of servos that you want. You can change the number of how you want it to move. And then really, ultimately, I think it's our dream that we start putting out other robots as well. As I said, Jimmy's just the first one. There's lots of other robots. And Guy's very happy because there is one of the robots in the 21st Century Robot book that is 7 feet tall. So Guy's really excited about making a 7-foot-tall robot. But the idea is that we want to give as much of the start of the files so that you can customize them as far as your skills will take you. And I know it's also our hope as a part of this that you will then go out and develop more skills. That if you want to build a robot that does something that our designs don't allow you to do, that you go out and figure out a way to make it happen. How to make a Jimmy that can walk and fly. How to make a Jimmy that can climb the walls. And the moment you've gone and figured that one out, then you send it back to everybody else. So everybody else can make robots like Jimmy that can fly and walk up walls.
That's great. So we're also, if there's questions from our live studio audience.
Live studio audience? Hey, when we say live studio audience, you have to make like a live studio audience. So, live studio audience? Any questions from anybody in the room? Anybody? You didn't think you were going to get called on, did you? Nope, I think we're clear from here in the room. We're going to have quite a bit of Q&A after the live broadcast here at Olin. Any other questions?
That's that's it from our side here. But thanks again. This has been fantastic. This is one of my favorite presentations that I've been part of, and the exciting part is that it's just the start. So this will be a fantastic journey that I can't wait to continue to watch develop and turn into something really, really amazing.
Great. Well, thank you. Listen. So again, please go out if you have a chance. Like I said, if you want to follow Jimmy on Twitter, he's 21C Robot. I'm Intel Futurist. Wayne is Kid Meccano. And of course, our folks at Make are just at Make. And please go to the Robot Hacks website where you can follow the progress. Also go to 21crobots.com where you can download the book and find out where things are going. As we say, there's going to be more robot hacks. There's going to be some really fabulous ones that are coming up, and then we're going to be scheduling more where we'll also get into the design of Jimmy. I do also want to say we have a contest going on the side on Twitter where if you tweet to me and to Jimmy, so Intel Futurist and 21C Robot, with the hashtag #MyRobotWould, if you can tell us what your 21st century robot would do, what would your robot do that other robots wouldn't do? What would make your robot an individual? We're actually going out and having a Twitter contest under that hashtag, and in about a month we're going to give away the small Modibot version of Jimmy. So we'll actually send you a version. We've got a roboticist, one of the early roboticists that I work with, by the name of Dr. Simon Edgerton, who's actually in the book. He's gonna pick 5 winners. So if you're interested in that, go hashtag #MyRobotWould, send it to Intel Futurist and to 21C Robot, and you can enter to win possibly one of the small Jimmys.
Very cool.
Good. All right, so I want to thank everybody here in the room. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the presenters as well. And all I got to say is let's build some robots together.
Yeah. So the next Robot Hacks will be November 6th. We've got Michael Overstreet, who's got a team of robot hobbyists. And Michael, you want to give us a real quick run-through of who will be appearing on Wednesday for your presentation?
Yeah, it's going to be me, Aaron Park, Michael Curry, then Figgett from Robot Dreams. Michael Curry's from MakerBot. Aaron Park's actually for Robotics. He's going to have some interesting things to talk about. A new servo that is coming out, which may help Jimmy. It's a smaller form factor, smaller size. And then Michael Curry's going to talk about his 3D design Danger Ball. Probably missing. And Roberto is going to talk about a friend of mine. Going to talk about his classes he teaches to high school students in the summer for engineering, math, and robotics classes. So it's going to be a nice lineup of people with different backgrounds and different ideas and different knowledges that I think would help out.
That's great. I'm excited. This is going to be a fun one. It's a great lineup, and it'll be a blast.
Check out the lineup on the community page. We just put it up, and it's these guys are Mike is being very modest. They're an awesome group of people.
Yeah, their bios, some of the bios, I was kind of surprised. They really nice backgrounds. Really, yeah.
Super. So we've got November 6th with Michael Overstreet and an all-star cast. November 13th, and then on the 20th will be the wrap-up for Robot Hacks, where we'll check in with all of the participating teams who've signed up for the kits of components and materials to work on their own robotics projects, and they through the course of the program, are updating our Google Plus page with the progress, and we're excited to see what they put together. So those of you guys who are participating teams, continue to update the Google Plus page, and then everyone who's watching this, everyone who's in our the Olin live studio audience in the room there, make sure to go to makezine.com/robot-hacks and sign up for the Robot Hacks community. There's a red button right there where you click to join the community. You can monitor the progress of everything and keep tuned into the upcoming broadcast. So once again, thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone who's presented today, and thank you, Olin, for hosting a fantastic event and a launch to a very exciting Robot Hacks program. And Stuart, thank you as well.
Thank you.
All right.